She stepped over the woman like she was invisible. It was raining. Cold. Relentless. The kind of rain that makes people rush home unless you don't have one. The homeless woman reached out, her voice barely audible. "Please, I just need help." But Evelyn Carter didn't even slow down. She adjusted her coat, avoided eye contact, and walked straight into her luxury building like nothing had happened. That moment should have ended there, just another cold encounter in a city that had seen thousands. But 3 days later, Evelyn would see that same woman again, not on the street, not begging, but staring back at her from a photograph that had been hidden for over 30 years. And in that moment, everything she thought she knew about her life collapsed, because the woman she refused to help wasn't a stranger. She was her mother. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Evelyn Carter had spent her entire life building an image, wealthy, powerful, untouchable, the kind of woman who hosted charity galas but never looked directly at the people she claimed to help. To the outside world, she was success personified, but there was one part of her past that had always remained incomplete. She had no real memory of her mother, no photos displayed, no stories shared, just a quiet explanation repeated for decades: "She died when I was young." But what if that wasn't true? What if the woman Evelyn ignored in the rain wasn't just a stranger asking for help, but the one person who had been searching for her all along? And if that was true, then one question changes everything. Why was her mother living on the streets while Evelyn lived in luxury? And an even heavier question begins to form. Who lied to her for 30 years? Evelyn Carter wasn't born into wealth, at least not in the way people imagined. She grew up in a quiet suburban town outside Chicago, raised by a man named Richard Carter, a self-made businessman known for his discipline and control. He rarely spoke about the past, and when he did, it was brief and final. Evelyn learned early not to ask questions. Her mother, she was told, had died in a car accident when she was just 4 years old. There were no photographs around the house, no keepsakes, no conversations, just absence. At first, as a child, Evelyn accepted it. Children tend to accept the world as it's given to them. But as she grew older, something about the silence felt deliberate. Still, Richard provided everything else: private schools, perfect clothes, a carefully structured life. And Evelyn adapted. She became polished, calculated, ambitious. By the time she moved to New York in her early 20s, she had already mastered the art of reinvention. She climbed quickly, first in finance, then into elite social circles. She married well, divorced strategically, and built a name that opened doors others couldn't even find. But there was one thing she never developed: empathy. People were either useful or irrelevant, and over time that mindset became part of her identity. So when she walked past that homeless woman in the rain, it wasn't cruelty in her mind. It was normal. If you are loving this video, go ahead and hit the like button. The night it happened, the city was quieter than usual. Rain had driven most people indoors, leaving the sidewalks nearly empty. The woman sat near the entrance of Evelyn's building, wrapped in layers that barely protected her from the cold. Her hands trembled, her voice cracked as she spoke. "Please, anything helps." Evelyn noticed her, of course she did, but she also noticed the smell, the disheveled hair, the inconvenience, and she made a decision in less than 2 seconds. Ignore. What she didn't notice was the way the woman looked at her, not like a stranger, but like someone who recognized her, like someone who had been waiting. 3 days later, Evelyn hosted a private dinner at her penthouse: high-profile guests, expensive wine, controlled conversation. Everything was as it should be. Until one of her guests brought up a charity initiative involving missing persons and family reunifications. It was meant to be light conversation, but then someone placed a stack of case files on the table: photos, stories, faces of people who had disappeared decades ago. Evelyn wasn't paying attention until one photograph caught her eye. Her hand froze midair. The room faded into silence, because staring back at her was the woman from the street, only younger, cleaner, and standing beside a little girl who looked exactly like her. At first, Evelyn laughed it off. It had to be a coincidence. Faces can look similar. Memory can play tricks. But something about the image stayed with her. That night, she couldn't sleep. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went back. The woman was still there, same spot, same fragile posture. This time, Evelyn didn't walk past. She stopped, and for the first time really looked. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the jaw, even the way she held her hands. "Do I know you?" Evelyn asked. The woman didn't answer immediately. She just stared like she had been waiting for that question her entire life. Then she said something that made Evelyn's chest tighten. "You used to call me Mom." Everything that followed moved quickly. Records were pulled, old documents uncovered, and the truth began to surface piece by piece. Her mother, Margaret Hale, had not died. She had disappeared, declared unstable, unfit, removed from Evelyn's life through a legal battle that had been sealed and buried. Richard Carter had rewritten the narrative, and no one had questioned it. Margaret had spent years trying to find her daughter, but without resources, without support, she slipped through the cracks and eventually onto the streets while Evelyn built a life on a lie. Somewhere in the middle of all this, a thought begins to settle in, one that's difficult to shake. How many times had Evelyn passed her before that night without ever noticing? Confronting her father wasn't easy. Richard denied everything at first, calm, controlled, the same way he had always been. But evidence doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to acknowledge it. Court records told a different story. Margaret hadn't abandoned Evelyn. She had been pushed out, labeled unstable after a series of disputes that painted her as unreliable. But there was something else, something buried deeper. Financial records suggested motive. Richard had gained full control of assets that were originally shared. Removing Margaret wasn't just personal, it was strategic. When Evelyn realized this, the image of her father began to fracture. The man who had raised her had also erased her mother, and for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar, guilt. Because while her mother had been searching for her, she had walked right past her, more than once. Rebuilding a relationship after 30 years isn't simple. Margaret didn't ask for much. She didn't demand apologies or explanations. She just wanted time. But time is complicated, especially when it's been lost. Evelyn tried to fix things the only way she knew how: money, housing, medical care. But some things can't be repaired that way. Trust doesn't return overnight, and forgiveness doesn't follow a schedule. Months passed, then a year. Their relationship grew slowly, carefully, but there was always something unspoken between them, a gap that couldn't be erased. And then one day, Margaret said something that stayed with Evelyn forever. "I didn't need you to save me. I just needed you to see me." That sentence changed everything, because it forced Evelyn to confront the truth. Her entire life, she had looked through people, not at them, and it cost her 30 years with the one person who mattered most. So now the question turns to you. If you were in Evelyn's position, would you have recognized your own mother, or would you have walked past her too? Before you go, tell me, where are you watching from? What time is it there? And what's the weather like today? I read every single comment. And if this story made you think differently about the people you pass every day, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the people we overlook are the ones we've been searching for all along.